Newsfirst, NEWSLINE with Faraz Shauketaly.
And a very good morning to you. This is NEWSLINE Live. We're broadcasting from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And apologies, you'll notice that we haven't got the tea here. But we have a slight operational difficulty, not too major. But now then, COVID-19, it seems to be everywhere. It is impacting on life globally. Kuwait has just announced a 2-week public holiday, 2 weeks. All flights, apart from cargo flights, will not be landing in Kuwait or taking off even. And so on and so forth. There are various measures being put in place. And it is impacting on life as a whole, including, of course, in Sri Lanka. It is now impacting perhaps on the political minefield, just as we've now entered the general election mode. To explain all this and comment on that and offer perhaps an insight is Professor Rajiva Vijayasinghe. Very good morning to you, Professor.
Morning, Faraz.
How bad is it then? Is this COVID?
Well, you know, I'm not an expert, so I can't really analyze it or do anything of the sort.
But I'm talking about the impact.
Well, again, with regard to the impact, it obviously seems to be horrendous in many places. I think Sri Lanka has been relatively lucky, have indeed most places in the tropics. And of course, the argument, I don't know how correct it is that given our temperature, both the heat and the fact that we have a drought has meant that it's less virulent than it was in colder climates or, you know, less, I would say, dry ones. But we just don't know what will happen.
Right.
You know, for instance, I think if you look at the papers 2 weeks ago, it was all about how terrible China was. China actually seems to have contained it
to a great extent.
Has. And of course, again, one cannot say anything until, you know, until the fat lady sings, as they would say. But what is happening in Italy and in Europe is pretty horrendous. England obviously has plans to shut down and so on and so forth. So we just can't say which way it's heading. I think within Sri Lanka, all we can do is monitor, but also exercise enormous care. You know, you will notice that we're not really exercising enormous care in the sense that crowds are proliferating with, you know, what they call big match fever. So lots and lots of people are flocking. And I suspect, being Sri Lankan, they will not allow the threat of COVID to stop their enjoyment. But having said that, I think they also have to remember that it's not only enjoyment, it's actually a public threat. Because the more you gather together...
I know that the Royal Turban big match, of course, has been... I don't think the 2 world wars managed to stop it. And then, you know, right throughout the terrorist happenings in Sri Lanka too,
you see, our decision makers obviously have their priorities. But, and since the elite have co-opted the next layers of the elite into their own big matches, I think you will find that this will continue to be the main social event in Sri Lanka for generations to come. Well,
the main sort of, one of the better known corporate events, of course, is the Capital Maharaj's annual review. And last afternoon we were told that after a lot of discussion and so on, it has been, a decision has been taken to postpone it in view of the concerns for safety and so on.
What is the Capital Review? Do you have large crowds coming and cheering you on? Do you appear on a podium?
Large crowds come and listen to, especially our staff. We are 27 companies diversified.
Right. And, well, I think it's very good of you to postpone it. I think that shows a certain
the last time we postponed it because of the security situation and so on. Now, what do you think? What about Vesak and so on? Now that's coming along.
Well, I think the same principles will have to be observed, that you observe and watch the scene. I mean, my perhaps too optimistic view is that this sort of thing tends to have a shelf life of a couple of months.
Right.
This may extend a bit more, but don't forget it's been bouncing around since February.
Indeed. Now, whilst that is all there, and then we are now into our election mode again, with nominations opened and so on. But I look at the island this morning. UNP warns those who flout its constitution of dire consequences. Really, are they joking here? This is a moment in time when you ought to be focused and encouraging your candidates at the, out there in the field, at the hustings. You need to be implementing your strategy and so on and so forth. Not talking about some constitution which has been...
What candidates, what strategy?
Oh, is it as bad as that? No,
well,
I see. But what is...
Come on, Faraz. I mean,
why
surely,
is your cousin hanging on to power? He's the cause of all this nonsense.
because he has nothing else to do.
Who?
Ranil. You know that. You remember you told me about how he was frolicking in a five-star hotel, but the minute he heard you were coming to check on who was paying, he ran away?
Yes.
Well, there you are.
Some years ago.
Yeah. So he's been frolicking at five-star hotels ever since, at state expense or party expense.
Yeah.
So what is he going to do after the party also rejects him, now that the country has done? I mean, if I were him, he should go back to that nice little house that his mother built in their garden for him, and have the piano, which he inherited from my Kurunagla aunt, which I think he and Maitri like playing, and listen to music. It's fun. I mean, I'm enjoying it thoroughly. I have a lovely little garden with lotuses and fish, and Ranil should cultivate that, but he instead cultivates fish like Akala Viraj. So you have to nurture such fish. You have to give them positions.
What do they feed on? On power?
On power. On power. I mean, I have... well, it's interesting. Akila Viraj is not, as far as I've heard, as corrupt as some of Ranil's crew.
Yeah.
But it depends what you mean by corruption. If you actually use state resources to have your splendid picture, which no one but Ranil thinks the country will admire, at vast expense, that is an appetite that feeds on itself, to cite Shakespeare. The second aspect, also to cite Shakespeare, is that Ranil's guiding motive has been revenge. Remember Hamlet, revenge? So the result is that he forgets everything else. This is what happened from 2015 onwards. Heaven knows I tried after Maithripala Sirisena won to say, move forward, forget revenge. Remember Mahinda Rajapaksa, even though in the last 3 years he didn't do enough work and that's why the country rejected him. Did so much for the country. No one else could have won that war. Why are you trying to persecute the poor man? That sort of viciousness. Now he'll spend all his energy persecuting Sajit and poor Ajit Pereira.
When do you see any possibility of this politics of revenge coming to an end?
No, I'm afraid not. It's all very, very nasty. It's, I was discussing some of this with Bandhala yesterday. And there's this extraordinary analysis by Gannath Obesekar, which I used to think was a bit simplistic, that we are a shame culture. And a shame culture means, A, you don't mind doing wrong so long as you're not caught out. But B, if you're caught out, you must get your revenge. The Buddha's that fantastic Jataka story about the way revenge mounts up and up and up. About the two women who birth after birth persecuted each other. I think Ranil will sort of be praying to be reborn to attack Sajit. And that'll go on and on and on. I don't think Sajit is like that.
Now then, I wanted to ask you about collective responsibility and how almost ironic it is how power finds itself concentrated in just one individual. Now my example is this. Cast your mind back to this whole business about Sri Lankan Airlines. And we had two events, if you like, we had a series of events, but let's take the most contemporary of the two. One was the ordering of, or the refleeting of the airline back in 2013, and then the cancellation charges that were paid out in the post-2015 government, where Ranil was the Prime Minister. Now then, the line minister, Kabir Hashim, some years after, or many, many moons later anyway, says, look, I was left out. I didn't know anything what was happening. They never asked me. They never told me. We had to write letter after letter, and then finally we got some sort of a response. Now, that response was that the board of Sri Lankan Airlines said, oh, well, we kept the finance minister and the prime minister informed. This was 3 weeks after they had made the payment. So, is there any good only telling the prime minister and his finance minister, who was, finance minister of sorts, because it had been split into 3.
Yeah.
Right?
Which one was it then, Ravi or Mangala?
I think it must have been Mangala, because
Right.
Ravi was out of this. But the point
What year
is,
was this?
2020, well, it was very recent, so 2018.
Right.
Now, the thing is this. The board of Sri Lankan Airlines says, look, we told the Prime Minister, we kept the Prime Minister informed. So let's leave it there for a moment.
Yeah.
Now cast your mind back to what Arjuna Mahendran,
Yeah.
not exactly a paragon of truth, but still.
Yeah.
He said to Due Gunaseka's Scope 1 committee, under oath, Due said, he got him to take the oath. Under oath, he said, well, I only did as I was instructed by the Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister being, of course, the Minister in charge of the Central Bank. Now, this is one hell of a how do you do, as they would say, because Mahendran took his instructions from the Prime Minister. Mahendran on his own decides to ignore the Monetary Law Act and the Monetary Board and so on, and says, well, the Prime Minister asked me to. Here we have the board of Sri Lankan Airlines saying, well, we didn't tell the line minister, but we told the Prime Minister.
You see, Faraz, it's
So can you
obviously
see
very
what I'm
simple.
saying?
No, I can see exactly what you're saying. You took a long time to say it.
Yeah.
But I suppose that's natural.
Yes, but I had to explain it properly.
Yes.
Carry on.
But I think the people have got the message with regard to the second one.
Right.
The second one everyone knows.
Yeah.
And of course the short answer is, why the hell aren't they indicting Ranil? The way that Jayanta Jayasuriya treated him in the questioning. One of the few good
At the Commission of
Sirius
Inquiry.
did was set up that Commission of Inquiry.
Yeah.
But everyone obviously wants to protect Ranil. Class. Elite, you also want to protect yourself for the future. It's like all the rumours about Rajitha Sen Ratna, hiding with the minister in the current government.
Yeah.
Now, given all that, that's one message,
Yeah.
that this, protecting each other
Yeah.
has to stop, but it won't stop. But the second, what you said about Kabir brings me to a very interesting point. How do you stop this autocracy?
Yeah.
And the simple answer is, you stand up for what you think is right.
Thank you, Rajiv.
And very simply, I suppose one of the reasons no one really likes me is that I stand up for what is right. I was
that's
a
what
resignation
Kabir should
on...
have resigned,
Kabir should have resigned, of course.
He
But
should have stood
Kabir,
up
I remember when I was, put under him,
Yeah.
as Chandrika so magniloquently put it, probably wishful thinking on her part. When that happened, I remember a good friend of his telling me, but Kabir will do whatever it takes. Kabir also wants to stay in power, and Kabir will crawl. Now he tells us.
Yeah. This is my point.
This is the point.
Now.
He didn't do it then.
Nine-
If you look at the
$116
sort of
million
people
later.
who resigned,
Yeah.
I suppose S.W. Bandaranaike, who crossed over, but like me, George Rajapaksa.
Yeah.
You remember George Rajapaksa in 1961 or 2 felt that the budget actually laid burdens on the people he could not accept.
Right.
He resigned. He stayed with his party.
Yeah.
As indeed I did in February 2015. I only crossed over after Bond scare when Ranil started saying, no, I haven't resigned.
Right.
He was trying to say, they sent me parcels of letters to answer from the ministry.
Ah.
And I just said, I've resigned. And Ranil said, you haven't resigned, we haven't accepted it. And I said, read your constitution. A minister resigns when a letter is sent under his hand.
Yeah.
But he was trying to tell the world. Kabir didn't resign. You've had that countless times. I mean, one of the problems that Mahinda Rajapaksa faced was that many people in his party, as he now knows, were muttering and muttering and muttering. But no one else would tell him direct. I think it was just Vasanta Sennaik and me. I mean, I actually wrote to him. Vasanta spoke to him. Vasanta gets on very well with him. And of course, the point is we both admire him.
So no,
but when someone goes wrong, Kabir, I think, admires Ranil tremendously. But when he's going wrong, you must say so. If you remember, you talked about collective responsibility. In a sense, perhaps the beginning of the end of the hopes that people placed in Chandrika when she won. There was a lot of hope about her. I actually voted for Srima, not because I thought she'd be better, but I've always felt two large majorities are not very good. And of course, as you know, we wrote the manifesto that Srima contested the election on, because Chanaka did it for Gamindra Senayaka. One of the best manifestos that's always found out later. You remember Tawakkal? Have you heard of Tawakkal? Lakshman Kadirkama, the greatest gentleman we've had in politics in this country for years, joined her cabinet, and he thought, these are cabinet, it's cabinet responsibility. He raised the issue of Tawakkal. I can't remember the details. It was something to do with something Mr. Ashraf was up to. And, you know, he would basically was, shut up, it's none of your business. Because, you know, Chandrika wanted the support.
We're coming back to current times. We have the splitting of the finance ministry into three parts. Central bank, state financial institutions with Kabir Hashim, and the residue, whatever the residue is, left to Ravi K. Now then, Ravi K, as the Minister of Finance, says, the interest rates are too high. It's March 2016 now. The interest rate's too high. I want you guys to bid low so that we can drive the rates down. And they all trot off. None of them, as far as I am aware, so much as informed the ministry, their respective ministry secretary, or their minister, Kabir Hashim, and they just carried on.
Sorry, what ministry was this?
Public enterprise.
Oh, right.
They had all the state banks and so on. Now then, although the finance minister says, you know, drive the rates down and so on the other side, the issuing authority is the central bank, who by his own admission was doing only as he was instructed by the Prime Minister, who was his line minister. All right? So Ravi doesn't have a say-so in that part. But there is this thing called the Registered Stocks and Shares Ordinance. Now, because this split was only done off the top, some of the legislation and so on, the statutes, refer to the Minister of Finance, as does, you know, everything else. So, don't you feel that this splitting of the finance ministry is the root cause of all this confusion?
The root cause is Ranil's total corruptibility, aided and abetted by Ravi Karanaik and Arjuna Mahendran. The complacence of, you know, the deputy governor who followed him, unlike the other two who tried to stay firm. So that's the root cause. But I suppose underlying it all is something, and this is something I've always worried about for the last 5 years. Did I do wrong in opposing Mahinda Rajapaksa? And I still don't think I did wrong, because whenever I think that the images of Sajjan Vasconod and Shenuka Senratne appear before my eyes, and I think, my God, they would have been running the country by now. But leaving that aside, and Mervyn De Silva jumped to the other side, as indeed Shenuka did, although she's crawling back, I think you will find that no one realized how phenomenally ignorant and stupid Maithripala Sirisena was. And I think underlying that is Chandrika, because one of the reasons why, you know, I thought he'd make a reasonable president is he didn't have a reputation for dishonesty. I thought Chandrika wanted to protect her party, the SLFP, and would build it up. So all these measures that were done in the first few weeks of splitting up the finance ministry, of this ridiculous cabinet, of all these ministers in different places to entrench the power of the Prime Minister over them. The simple fact, as Ruang Vijayawardene said, but he knows everything. Because, you know, they also were shocked when he took up things like, he became the Minister of Children's Affairs, Youth Affairs, blah, blah, blah. All that, Sirisena should have resisted. But he, you know, had got into this phase where he thought, you know, I have to follow this guy. And it was only gradually that he realized that following him was the route to oblivion. And now this man thinks he's an eagle. This, you know, we've heard of wolves in sheep's clothing. This is the first time I've heard of a sheep pretending to be an eagle.
Thank you for your questions. I'm going to take this one. Just check out who is left with RW. Ranga Herat, Akila, Navin Sanaka, Vajirabe Gunawardana, John Amaratunga, Daya Pereira, maybe Ravi.
Dayagamake.
Yeah.
And don't forget Sagala.
Oh, yes, and Sagala.
Sagala jumped.
Yes.
Well, it is interesting that even Rajita and Lakshmana.
So is this a blessing in disguise for
I
Sajid
said so. I mean, you know, I remember,
together?
I think I tweeted a week or two ago, this is so good for Sajid if he has the guts to go ahead.
Yeah.
And I really feared that, because I don't know whether you read Vasant Slanganaya's brilliant piece about 2 months ago on why he finally left this bunch, even though he was very pleased when Sajid became the candidate. And they expected Sajid to stand firm. And instead, as Vasant said, he came sailing in on a swan. And in those days, Sarath Fonseca was one of Ranil's groupies.
Oh, yes.
And he was crushed. The first meeting was organized by Ravi in Colombo, and none of the decent guys was given a speech except, I think, one.
Yeah.
And Sajid just was a wimp. And even in the last 3 or 4 weeks...
He has sort of come...
Well, it was important that he just stopped this blackmail. And in fact, I said, it'll be wonderful now, because when the election is held...
as well?
What rubbish, because once they've taken the decision, there's not going to be a UNP after this election. It'll be a bit like the SLFP. You know, Ranil and Sirisena will, you know, sit on their branches saying we're both eagles.
So this can be an opportunity to have some a clean party, if you like.
The reason I worry about that is that I think there are now people with Sajid who are not going to be clean. You know, you just said Ravi, maybe with Ranil.
Well,
I mean,
I'm reading out a message.
You know, the very fact that Sajid is still working with people like Lakshman Kirel and Sarath Fonseca is a bit worrying. But Sajid will have to learn. I don't think he'll have great cleanliness, if that's the word. I do hope that the SLPP doesn't take any of these UNP renegades. I'm sure a few will not want to go with the elephant, but will start trotting along to the SLPP. You know, some of the names you mentioned, Ranga Bandara, I think you meant, not Ranga Herat. Ranga Herat is a distinguished spinner. So I think when the election is held, if the UNP stands, I don't think it will. How can Ranil stand when his great fear was being decimated in Colombo by Sajid? You know, imagine if Sajid gets 4 times the votes Ranil did, the die-hard Colombo 7 group, the person Vasanta described as Diabolica, and a few others will rally to Ranil.
The thing with Ranil is that Ranil commanded a lot of respect from all sorts of quarters, including the chairman of our company. Probably be the last show I'm doing now. Honestly, he had a lot of respect, but you know, if we examine it, no sooner that Ranil started embracing corruption and so on, you could see that the distancing started then. Obviously, you know, our chairman didn't want to have anything to do with that. And this is what's going on. Ranil can't say, look, I insisted on the change of the system, and then, you know, by affidavit, let the Commission of Inquiry know that he didn't expect Mahendran to break the laws.
Well, you see, very clearly, everyone now knows, and this is where even Kabir and Malik were involved. You know, don't forget, Kabir and Malik's hands aren't clean as well.
No.
They are the people who turned up.
Yes, and I mean, who
demanded.
Gave the letter.
So it was a great plan by the United UNP to get a lot of money to fight the election. And, you know, I'm just sad that this is not being looked at. I mean, my policy was very clear in 2015, it's the same now. Stop this persecution, introduce a law to enable confiscation of property that cannot be explained.
Unexplained wealth.
Very simple. You know,
Absolutely.
I would certainly not say confiscate Ranil's old house, but confiscate everything else he has and allow him to live there in peace. But don't let him flaunt his wealth. I mean, Ravi and so on. They have lots of property that would help our budget immeasurably. That should be taken over.
A lot of people probably blamed us, and we got a bad name for sort of distancing ourselves from him. But I think the public realization is now very much on the other footing.
Yes, very much so. You know, don't forget, I mean, I voted for Ranil's party in 1999 because I thought he'd be more efficient than Chandrika. I never knew that he would then hand everything over on a platter to the Tigers. This time round, I think he got annoyed with me. I had no objection to him being the Prime Minister. I think he started getting annoyed with me when Ravi said, you know, he must be sworn in the same time as Sirisena. I said, you can't do that. And Ranil, who was pretending he wasn't listening, you know, he was letting Ravi do his dirty work. But why can't you do that?
Right.
So I said, there's a Prime Minister in place. So again, the first thing Sirisena did was to appoint a Prime Minister when there was no vacancy. Not acceptable.
But now then, what do you say? What do you say? What do you think? We've got within 2 weeks. Will we see them joining hands, agreeing on a symbol? What's going to happen?
No, because, you know, obviously, Ranil, the bottom line is Sajit wants to contest from Colombo. That's the end of Ranil completely. I mean, the end of Ranil has already happened. But Ranil cannot allow that. So now he'll sulk. He will actually probably announce if the UNP stands, either that he's not going to contest, or he may say, no, you know, in order to preserve the anti-government vote, the UNP will not contest. You know, like the SLFP has done now.
But all this is maybe leading dangerously close to this potential to obtain a 2/3 majority. Though having said that, I also noticed that Mahinda Rajapaksa is now saying he's taken a slight change of course. He's saying now that you know, he wants the majority. He's turned this. There's no mention now of this of the 2/3.
I'm very glad, because I think the biggest mistake Gota has made is to precipitate this election. You know, in 2009, I wrote to Mahinda Rajapaksa saying, don't have an early presidential. Use the momentum of a war victory, not to win another electoral victory, but to do the reforms. And I couldn't see him before I went abroad. I came back and said, did you get my letter? And he said, you and Gota are the only people who told me not to have the election. Now, he was implying that Gota and I didn't know anything about politics. So he had the election, disaster followed. Because the Americans used that opportunity to use Sarath Fonseca and so on. These premature elections are a destructive fact because they have become a substitute for action. And Gota had a unique opportunity in November. You know, everyone was so pleased he was elected. I must say, he himself behaved admirably for he has been behaving admirably since. But he should have pushed through his reforms then. Because the opposition would have voted for any reform that was in the national interest. They could not, apart from the fact that they wanted their pensions. But now, any reform that comes up will be partisan and be seen as partisan. And that's a mistake, because you needed to reform it by consensus. And to be quite honest, Faraz, I'd shown the way, because all the people attacked me for voting for 19. 19 made the situation better than previously. But all the flaws in 19 I had amended. The only thing that they wouldn't let me, you know, I put forward several amendments. The Secretary General wouldn't let me amend the electoral system because he said that's not salient to the bill.
So, sorry, just as we're about to finish, I must respond to this. Somebody's asking what I presume our network will do if Sajid has people like Rajata, Malik Samaravikrama and others. I suppose what they mean is, you know,
crooks,
questionable, people of questionable, Lakshman Kiryala and so on. Well, our chairman, including our network, we'll stay aloof. We're not going to be part of this corrupt nonsense. That's your answer. We will not be part of this corrupt nonsense. So I hope I've answered the question for you and for everybody else. Because it is important, isn't it, Rajiv, to stay, to make sure that you stand up, as you, at the beginning when you said that you need to stand up for what is right. And if Kabir Hashim was being left out at that time, and if he was genuinely being left out, and it is not just some excuse that he's now using, then he ought to have stood up in cabinet and said, listen, I'm the line minister, it means nonsense to me, you are paying cancellation fees and 3 weeks later telling me that the Prime Minister was kept informed. So, you know, you can go hang yourselves, and torn up his appointment letter and left the cabinet room. That is what he ought to have done.
Of course, that is what he had done. Then what happens to all his relations who were living off him? I told you that, you know, when I resigned, you know, Kabir pretended that he wanted me not to resign. But his relations came to my minister. I don't know whether you know that when I went there were 11 vehicles for me to use.
Right.
I said I don't want them. The relations came and took the vehicles the minute he became the cabinet minister. So Kabir also has to keep his whole family, his aunts and his uncles and his sister-in-laws and his brother-in-law, and he couldn't give up his ministry.
You mean the Rikazes of the world? Who? No, don't know the name.
Right.
But, you know,
yeah, and that's what they do, because they, you know, yapena, that wonderful singular word, all of these bunch of crooks, and the crooks get more and more crooked because they have to keep these people going. So Kabir will not resign.
Well, sad, but
Very sad.
that's the way it is.
Very, very sad.
Let's watch the progress that is being made, and we'll no doubt see you on one of our other programs soon.
Always a pleasure, Faraz.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe has been with Newsline Live this morning. Thank you very much, Professor. And News First will continue coverage of that very important matter, COVID-19. Please be totally aware of washing your hands and so on and so forth. And you know what? I think Sri Lankans got it right long years ago, because we never did this. We did this. So thank you for watching. Take care. And if you're going to the big match, do enjoy it. Take care and God bless.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.